Welcome to Starlight Sci-Fi, where the universe is our canvas and humanity's story shines brightest. Prepare for a journey beyond the stars, where imagination meets inspiration. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to join us on this cosmic adventure. The universe is vast, and with its endless possibilities come countless tragedies. For one species on the brink of extinction, hope had been all but lost. Every advanced civilization ignored their cries, dismissing their plight as insignificant. But when the galaxy turned its back, one unlikely species, the youngest and least powerful, decided to step in. This is the story of how humanity became their savior against all odds. In the vast emptiness of the universe, a faint signal pulsed steadily, unnoticed by most who passed it. It had been traveling through the void for centuries, a quiet cry for help from a desperate and dying world. This beacon originated from the planet Avaris, located in the remote Kelsar Nebula, a region rarely visited due to its volatile stellar phenomena and lack of strategic value. Once a thriving world, Avaris was now a barren husk. Its surface was scorched, its oceans evaporated, and its skies choked with poisonous gases. The last remnants of its people, the Kelyrians, clung to life in crumbling underground cities, their fragile ecosystem on the brink of collapse. The Kelyrians were an ancient species, one of great artistry and ingenuity in their prime. They had once constructed soaring cities of translucent crystal, powered by clean and boundless energy. But their ingenuity had failed to save them from a cosmic catastrophe, a sudden and violent acceleration of their star's aging process. The once stable sun that had nurtured their world turned into a seething cauldron of chaos, releasing waves of deadly radiation and scorching the surface of Avaris in mere centuries. Desperate to survive, the Kelyrians sent out a universal distress signal. Encoded in it was a plea for help, a map to their location, and a summary of their plight. They sent it knowing the odds were slim. Advanced galactic civilizations often ignored weaker species. To them, resource expenditure was measured in profit and utility. Unless a species possessed rare resources, critical knowledge, or strategic influence, their survival was deemed inconsequential. Over the centuries, the distress signal reached many of the galaxy's dominant civilizations. Each one analyzed it with cold efficiency, determining the Kelyrians to be of little value. Their art and culture were deemed irrelevant relics, their technologies too outdated to be worth salvaging. Even their location dangerously close to an unstable star made any rescue attempt more trouble than it was worth. For the powerful, the Kelyrians were simply not worth saving. When the signal finally reached Earth, humanity had only recently gained membership in the galactic community. They were still considered a minor player, lacking in influence, resources, or advanced technology. Yet, when human astronomers decoded the distress beacon, they didn't see irrelevance. They didn't see a waste of time. They saw desperation, suffering, and a chance to make a difference. The haunting simplicity of the Kelyrians' plea resonated deeply with humanity. This was a species fighting against impossible odds, clinging to life while the rest of the galaxy turned away. Humanity had faced its own struggles, its own moments of despair, and knew the power of hope. Saving the Kelyrians wasn't a matter of strategic value or galactic politics. It was a moral imperative. Without hesitation, Earth's leaders approved a bold and unprecedented mission, Project Dawnlight. It was risky, costly, and would stretch humanity's fledgling resources to their limit. But humanity wasn't deterred. They were determined to prove that, in a universe dominated by apathy, they could be different. The moment humanity made the decision to act, the enormity of the task began to sink in. Avaris, the dying Kelyrian homeworld, was located far beyond the reach of most galactic routes, isolated in the dangerous Kelsar Nebula. It wasn't just the distance that posed a challenge, it was the treacherous environment surrounding the star system. The space near Avaris was filled with gravitational anomalies, intense radiation storms, and erratic magnetic fields. It was a cosmic labyrinth that would strain even the most advanced technology. Humanity's fleet was modest, its resources still limited by years of galactic isolation. But there was something in their nature, something uniquely human that propelled them forward. They had always been problem solvers, inventors, and dreamers. If no one else was willing to help the Kelyrians, humanity would find a way, no matter the odds. The mission was called Project Dawnlight, and it became a defining moment for humankind. The fleet was a hastily assembled group of ships, some repurposed cargo vessels, others smaller military crafts modified for the journey. The fleet's most advanced ship was a research vessel, equipped with newly developed warp drives and radiation shielding and experimental design meant to push the boundaries of human space exploration. But even these cutting-edge technologies were untested on such a large scale, and the risk of failure loomed over every step of the journey. Before departure, engineers worked around the clock, installing new radiation dampeners and reinforcing ship hulls. Navigational systems were recalibrated to avoid the worst of the radiation storms, but everyone knew that luck would play a significant role. It wasn't just the technology that would determine their success, it was the sheer will to overcome the challenges that lay ahead. As the fleet set off from Earth, there was a collective sense of both excitement and trepidation. The journey would take years, and the unknown stretched out ahead like a black void. The crew of each ship knew the stakes. They weren't just venturing into uncharted space. They were racing against time to save an entire species from extinction. The Kelyrians were running out of time, and every second that passed brought them closer to annihilation. The journey was harder than anyone could have imagined. Radiation storms tore through the ships, frying their sensitive systems and forcing them to make dangerous detours. One ship, the Epsilon Voyager, fell victim to a burst of radiation that shattered its communications array and sent it careening off course. Though the crew managed to regain control, they had lost precious time. Every detour meant that they would arrive later, and with each passing day, the odds of the Kelyrians surviving grew slimmer. Then, disaster struck. A rogue asteroid field, invisible until it too late, collided with one of the cargo ships, the Reliance. It was a devastating blow. The ship, carrying critical supplies and a portion of the evacuation equipment, was torn apart in an instant. The crew of the Reliance perished in the explosion, their sacrifice ensuring that the remaining ships would stay on course. The loss was felt deeply across the fleet, but it also steeled their resolve. There was no turning back now. Every human aboard the fleet knew that they were carrying the hopes of an entire species, and they could not afford to fail. Even with the sabotage, storms, and asteroid fields, the fleet pressed on. Against the backdrop of endless stars and cosmic chaos, the human spirit proved to be their greatest strength. With each challenge, the fleet grew more determined, more united in their mission to save the Kelyrians. This was a journey not just of survival, but of compassion, something that the galactic powers had long forgotten. When the human fleet finally arrived at Avaris, the sight that greeted them was far worse than anyone had imagined. The planet's once beautiful surface, home to towering cities and sprawling forests, was now a barren wasteland. Vast cracks marred the ground, the remnants of a world slowly torn apart by the dying star at its heart. The oceans had boiled away long ago, leaving behind only salt and scorched earth. The skies were darkened with thick clouds of ash and toxic gas. From space, Avaris looked like a world abandoned to the void, a place where life had struggled and lost. The Kelyrians had once been a proud and thriving civilization, renowned across the galaxy for their art, music, and cutting-edge technology. But now all that remained was a race hanging on by a thread. Deep beneath the surface, the Kelyrians had retreated into a vast network of underground cities, protected from the radiation and the harsh conditions above. These underground bunkers had kept them alive, but they were now failing. The air was toxic, the water supplies dwindling, and the advanced systems that once powered their cities were rapidly deteriorating. The Kelyrians had done everything they could to preserve their way of life, but now, with the energy cores of their cities running dry, they were facing an imminent collapse. Humanity's fleet hovered above the planet, preparing for the next phase of their mission. As the ships descended toward the planet's surface, the full scope of the challenge became clear. The underground cities, although functional in a basic sense, were unsuited for the long-term survival of an entire species. The planet's gravity was also a significant issue. The Kelyrians had evolved to live in the intense gravity of Avaris, and their physiology was adapted to the planet's high density. Moving them to a new world with lower gravity would be disastrous, if not done carefully. The humans didn't have much time to prepare. The collapsing star at the heart of the system was rapidly increasing in instability, and with each passing day, the planet became more dangerous. Radiation levels on the surface were rising, and soon the entire planet would be uninhabitable. Humanity's engineers and scientists quickly began mapping the underground cities, studying the Kelyrians' environment, and looking for solutions. It became clear that the evacuation would not be as simple as loading the Kelyrians onto ships and leaving. The Kelyrians could not simply be moved without significant risks to their health. Their bodies were accustomed to the intense gravity of avarice, and any extended exposure to lower gravity would cause debilitating side effects, possibly even death. In short, the Kelyrians couldn't survive on a new world without serious adjustments. The only viable solution was to create an artificial biosphere that could sustain the Kelyrians as they adapted to their new environment. But even this was no easy task. The humans didn't have the technology to instantly terraform a planet, and the Kelyrians couldn't survive in the ships long enough for a slow process. The only option was to build something that could sustain them in the interim, a series of habitats capable of mimicking the conditions of avarice and ensuring the Kelyrians' gradual adaptation to a new world. As the humans worked tirelessly to devise a solution, an unexpected discovery was made in the Kelyrian archives. Deep in the heart of their crumbling cities, the Kelyrians had hidden knowledge that no one had expected to find: ancient blueprints for energy manipulation that could revolutionize galactic power systems. This technology was far beyond anything humanity had yet discovered, and it was clear that the Kelyrian civilization had once been on the brink of achieving something extraordinary. But now, it seemed, they were on the verge of losing it all. Despite the challenges they faced, humanity knew they couldn't leave without trying to save everything: the Kelyrians, their history, and their future. It was a monumental task, but humans had always risen to challenges, especially when lives hung in the balance. The hope was not just to evacuate a species, but to bring them a future where they could once again thrive, this time with the help of their new human allies. As humanity's mission to save the Kelyrians gained momentum, word of their efforts spread throughout the galaxy. For most of the galaxy's advanced civilizations, the idea of stepping in to rescue a species on the brink of extinction was unfathomable. The intergalactic community had long been ruled by cold pragmatism, where power, resources, and influence were the only currencies that mattered. In a universe where the strongest ruled, and the weak were left to wither, the notion that a relatively young species like humanity would take it upon themselves to save the Kelyrians was met with skepticism, anger, and outright hostility. The Galactic Council, a powerful body composed of the most influential and technologically advanced species, saw humanity's actions as reckless and naive. To them, the Kelyrians' plight was a tragic story, but one that didn't warrant the investment of resources or time. The Kelyrians had no unique technologies, no rare minerals or assets to offer in return. They were simply another species, one that had failed to adapt to their harsh environment. The Council had more pressing concerns: political intrigue, territorial disputes, and the delicate balance of power between the most dominant civilizations. The idea of one of the youngest civilizations, humanity, daring to intervene in the natural course of galactic events was seen as a direct challenge to the established order. The Council quickly issued a formal decree denouncing humanity's actions. Their message was clear: humanity was overstepping its bounds. They were wasting resources on a hopeless cause, and in doing so, they were threatening the stability of the galaxy. Behind closed doors, the leaders of the Council and their military allies plotted to stop the mission. Sabotage became the preferred method. The first wave of interference came in the form of misinformation and propaganda. News of humanity's mission to avarice was distorted and spread across the galaxy, painting them as naive and reckless fools. Stories circulated that humanity's intervention was merely a cover for some larger, more nefarious agenda, one that aimed to disrupt the balance of power. It wasn't long before suspicion and distrust began to build, both among the galactic elite and among the general populace. But the sabotage didn't stop at rumors. As the human fleet pushed forward, small, seemingly accidental malfunctions began to occur. One of the fleet's primary cargo ships, the Horizon, was struck by a powerful electrical surge that short-circuited its engines. The crew scrambled to repair the ship, but the damage was extensive, and they lost precious time. At first, the crew chalked it up to bad luck. But when similar issues arose on other ships, the crew grew suspicious. It wasn't until a covert transmission was intercepted that humanity realized the truth: rogue elements within the galactic community were actively working to thwart their mission. Unknown saboteurs, likely hired by factions within the Galactic Council, had infiltrated the fleet, planting devices that caused critical malfunctions in key systems. At one point, the entire navigation system of the fleet's flagship, the Liberty, was compromised, sending the vessel off course for days. The human fleet's morale began to crumble under the constant threat of sabotage. The crew knew they were up against far more powerful opponents, and each loss, whether it was a damaged ship or a failed mission, felt like a personal attack. But it was during these dark moments that the true strength of humanity's resolve emerged. For every act of sabotage, there was a countermeasure. For every ship delayed, there were others that pressed forward. The human spirit proved to be more resilient than the galaxy had anticipated. Despite the interference, humanity refused to abandon their mission. The Kelyrians were counting on them, and Earth's leaders had made a solemn promise they would not let them down. Every setback, every act of sabotage, only strengthened humanity's determination. In the face of overwhelming opposition, humanity had only one choice: to persevere. The Kelyrians' lives were on the line, and humanity would stop at nothing to fulfill its promise. As the fleet made its final approach to Avarice, they knew the dangers that awaited them, not just from the collapsing star, but from the hostile forces of the galaxy itself. But despite the growing tension and the dark forces working against them, humanity held on to their belief. Compassion, when combined with unwavering determination, could overcome even the most powerful forces in the universe. As the human fleet neared Avarice, a sense of urgency gripped the crew. The Kelyrians' time was running out, and despite the sabotage, despite the setbacks, humanity could feel the weight of their responsibility pressing down on them. The moment they had prepared for was fast approaching, an impossible task now made even harder by the interference of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. But the humans would not be deterred. They had come this far, and they would see it through. Avarice, from space, looked like a dying star planet on the brink of destruction. The star at the center of the system had already entered the final stages of its life, and the once thriving world below was slowly being swallowed by its fierce heat. Radiation levels on the surface were unbearable, and the underground cities where the Kelyrians sought refuge were deteriorating at an alarming rate. The planet was barely habitable anymore, a place where life could no longer survive without help. The fleet's first priority was to safely extract the Kelyrians, but the complex underground cities presented a challenge like no other. The underground passages had once been lined with technology so advanced that it could have rivaled some of the most sophisticated cities across the galaxy. But now those same systems were failing. Energy cores that once had powered the subterranean cities were on the brink of collapse, and the air filtration systems, though still operational, could not sustain the entire population for much longer. The human engineers had studied the blueprints of these cities and devised a plan to stabilize the power grid temporarily while the evacuation took place. But there was no guarantee it would last. The clock was ticking. As the human ships descended toward Avarice, their descent was met with even more resistance. A sudden surge of energy emanated from the planet's surface, disrupting the fleet's communications and navigation systems. It was a dangerous, unforeseen event, one that suggested the planet's instability had reached a critical point. The gravitational anomalies and magnetic fields had become even more erratic, threatening to pull the ships off course, or worse, destroy them altogether. The fleet's commanders were forced to make a choice: continue the descent despite the overwhelming risks, or turn back and lose any chance of saving the Kelyrians. There was no hesitation. The fleet pressed on. Using manual controls, the human ships managed to break through the unstable gravitational fields and land just outside the largest of the Kelyrian underground cities. The team of human engineers, scientists, and medical personnel quickly set to work, establishing a temporary base camp and linking up with the Kelyrian leaders who had been waiting for their arrival. The Kelyrians, though grateful, were deeply weary. Their hope had all but faded after countless failed attempts to secure help from other civilizations. But now, standing before the humans who had defied the entire galaxy to help them, their resolve reignited. The evacuation plan was simple but dangerous. The Kelyrians, weak from years of exposure to their planet's toxic atmosphere, would be transported in shifts to the fleet's ships. But the Kelyrians' physical adaptation to their homeworld's harsh gravity would not make the journey easy. In fact, the very process of relocating them to the ships carried significant risks. Prolonged exposure to the lower gravity of the ship's biospheres could cause severe health issues for many, potentially leading to permanent damage or death. The humans had prepared as best they could, but there were no guarantees. The Kelyrians' fragile condition meant that every single one of them would require medical care during the journey. Their survival, in many ways, depended on how well the humans could manage the transition. Yet the risk of not acting was far worse. The planet's collapse was imminent. Despite the mounting dangers, there was a sense of unity among the humans and Kelyrians. For the first time in centuries, they were not alone. The humans had shown that compassion could still drive actions in a galaxy where apathy had long been the dominant force. As the first wave of Kelyrians boarded the ships, a solemn silence fell over the fleet. It was a moment of reflection not just on the scale of the mission, but on what it meant for the future of all civilizations. In the midst of the chaos, humanity's resolve remained unshaken. They were no longer just saving a species, they were proving to the galaxy that it was possible to fight for something greater than themselves. They were showing that when faced with the impossible, humanity would always choose to act with heart and courage. But with every passing moment, the dangers grew. The star at the center of the system raged violently, and soon the planet itself would become uninhabitable. The final evacuation had begun. As the evacuation of the Kelyrians continued, the human fleet faced increasing difficulties. The unstable conditions on Avaris only grew worse with each passing hour. The collapsing star at the heart of the system was now emitting violent solar flares, sending waves of radiation crashing through the atmosphere and into space. The intense heat was already causing massive wildfires on the planet's surface, making it even more dangerous for those who remained. Time was running out. There was no longer any doubt that the planet would soon become a lifeless rock, burned beyond recognition. The first few evacuations had gone smoothly, but as more Kelyrians were brought aboard, it became clear that the situation was becoming critical. The human ships were already stretched to their limits. The fragile, makeshift biospheres that had been hastily constructed to mimic the gravity and atmospheric conditions of Avaris were beginning to show signs of strain. Each Kelyrian passenger required specialized care, from adjusting their environment to monitoring their health, and it wasn't long before the human medical teams were overwhelmed. Though the Kelyrians were strong and resilient, they were not designed for the conditions they now faced. Many were growing weak, their bodies struggling to adapt to the lower gravity and the artificial environments aboard the ships. But the humans didn't flinch. They worked around the clock to maintain the biospheres, constantly recalibrating the systems to ensure the safety of the Kelyrians. Medical teams administered treatments, while engineers reinforced the ship's structural integrity, praying that the delicate equipment would hold long enough for the evacuation to be completed. The Kelyrians, who had once been a proud, technologically advanced species, now found themselves relying on the kindness of strangers who had risked everything to save them. On the surface, the last remaining Kelyrians were being loaded onto the ships, but there was one final challenge to face. As the evacuation teams worked to transport the last group of Kelyrians, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. The entire city was shaking violently. A massive quake rumbled through the crust of the planet, causing entire buildings to collapse into the deep fissures that had opened in the earth. The underground cities were on the brink of total destruction. One of the key evacuation routes had just been cut off by a landslide, trapping a group of Kelyrians in a lower level. Humanity had to act fast. The team leading the operation knew that if they didn't reach the survivors quickly, they would be lost forever. Amid the chaos, a small rescue squad was dispatched to the trapped survivors. The human soldiers, unflinching in the face of danger, made their way through the crumbling tunnels, dodging falling debris and navigating through the shifting ground. It was a race against time. If the Kelyrians were not brought out within the hour, the tunnel would be sealed for good. The squad fought through the treacherous landscape, knowing the risks all too well. With the star's radiation continuing to intensify, every second they spent on the surface brought them closer to becoming trapped themselves. Yet they reached the survivors just in time, pulling them from the rubble and guiding them to the nearest evacuation point. As the last of the Kelyrians were brought aboard the ships, the ground beneath them began to crack wide open, The subterranean cities, once marvels of engineering, now crumbled into the fiery chasm that had formed below. There was no turning back. The human fleet, now loaded to capacity with refugees, began its final ascent, lifting off from the surface of a dying world. But just as they were preparing to leave the atmosphere, an unexpected surge of energy emanated from the planet. A final burst of power from the collapsing star shot through the system, creating a powerful shockwave that reverberated throughout the fleet. The ships shook violently, their systems straining against the force. But the human crews, who had already overcome so much, worked together with remarkable precision to keep the fleet intact. Against all odds, they managed to push through the shockwave, avoiding the worst of the planet's final moments. As the fleet reached the safety of the outer orbit, Avarice exploded in a brilliant flash of light, its destruction complete. The star, now fully unstable, had consumed the planet, turning it into a burst of energy that would echo through the cosmos for eons. The human fleet, carrying the last of the Kelyrians, watched in silent awe as the remnants of Avarice vanished into the vastness of space. There were no celebrations, no cheers, only the quiet understanding that the impossible had been done. Humanity had saved the Kelyrians from the brink of extinction, and in doing so, they had proven that even in a cold and indifferent galaxy, compassion and determination could still change the course of history. The final exodus was over, but humanity's journey was only just beginning. The human fleet, now carrying the last survivors of the Kelyrian race, drifted through the endless void of space. The echoes of Avarice's destruction faded behind them, leaving only the cold, silent expanse ahead. There were no words to mark the moment, no speeches, no triumphant celebrations. The destruction of a planet and the survival of an entire species were too weighty to be summed up in any simple expression. Instead, there was a shared understanding among the crew and the Kelyrians. They had done the impossible. They had defied a galaxy that had turned its back on a dying people, and in doing so, they had forged an unspoken bond between two civilizations. Humanity's fleet was heading toward a new world, one that had been prepared as a sanctuary for the Kelyrians. This world, still untouched by the devastation that had ravaged their home planet, was located in a distant system far from the political intrigues and the harsh realities of the galaxy's more powerful civilizations. It was a world that was perfect for starting anew, but it would require time and effort to adapt. The Kelyrians had been through so much, and now they faced the difficult task of rebuilding their lives from the ashes of their former world. The Kelyrians, weak and fragile after their long ordeal, needed time to recover. The human medical teams worked tirelessly to ensure that they received the care and attention they needed. The journey to their new home was long, but during that time, something remarkable began to happen. As the Kelyrians settled into their new environment, the artificial biospheres mimicking Avarice gravity and atmosphere began to work. Slowly, their bodies began to adjust, and the strength they had lost began to return. But it wasn't just their physical strength that was being restored. Over the course of the journey, the Kelyrians began to regain something even more important: hope. For the first time in a long while, they began to believe that they had a future. They weren't just survivors clinging to life on a dying planet. They were people with a second chance. The trauma of their planet's destruction, the loss of their history, and the betrayal by the galaxy's dominant powers had been immense. But now, as they watched their new home world come into view, they realized that they had been given something far more precious: a future. The humans, too, were changed by the experience. There had been no guarantee that the mission to save the Kelyrians would succeed, and there had been moments when hope had seemed all but lost. But in the end, they had succeeded. They had saved an entire species, one that had been written off by the rest of the galaxy. It was a monumental achievement, but it was also a reminder of what humanity was capable of when they acted with compassion and conviction. In the weeks that followed, the humans helped the Kelyrians establish themselves on their new world. It was a long and difficult process after all. An entire species had to be nurtured back to health and provided with the means to rebuild their society. The humans shared their knowledge and technology, offering guidance in agriculture, medicine, and engineering. In return, the Kelyrians offered their own wisdom, and slowly, a sense of community began to form. The two species, once strangers, now stood united in their shared goal: the survival and flourishing of the Kelyrian people. As the Kelyrians built their homes and settled into their new environment, they began to rediscover the things they had once cherished. The arts, music, and sciences flourished once again, fueled by a new sense of hope and the desire to rebuild what had been lost. Humanity, too, found something in this new alliance, a reminder of the importance of empathy and solidarity in a galaxy that often seemed indifferent to the suffering of others. The galaxy had watched as humanity defied its cold, pragmatic nature to save the Kelyrians, and now something unexpected was beginning to happen. Other civilizations, those who had once dismissed humanity as an insignificant player, started to take notice. The acts of compassion and determination that had led humanity to save the Kelyrians had made ripples across the galaxy. The humans had shown that there was more to life than power and dominance. They had demonstrated that even in the harshest of times, a commitment to something greater could inspire change. Though the galaxy had rejected the Kelyrians, humanity had embraced them, and in doing so, had set the stage for a new kind of future. It was a future where compassion, not just power, could define the course of history. And as the Kelyrians began to rebuild, humanity knew that the seeds of change had been planted. This wasn't just a new beginning for the Kelyrians, it was a new dawn for all civilizations. A reminder that even in the vast, cold expanse of space, the bonds of kindness and hope could transcend the boundaries of species and star systems. Thank you for joining us on this extraordinary journey. At Starlight Sci-Fi, we celebrate the boundless potential of humanity and the stories that make us who we are. If you enjoyed this tale, be sure to like, subscribe, and share with fellow adventurers. Until next time, keep looking to the stars because that's where the future awaits.